Hey, this is Chris Plush from CG Masters, and today we're going to make an interesting kind of soccer ball. It's not the classic black and white soccer ball you might be expecting, which can be made easily from a shape called a truncated icosahedron, which is to say a sphere composed of alternating pentagons and hexagons. Today we're going to be making a little bit more difficult of a pattern, so we're not going to be able to use a base shape like that. So let's start by loading in our reference image. I'm going to go into front view and delete my cube. Sometimes I feel like the cube doesn't get the respect it deserves. Alright, let's go into open image. And I'm going to load in my reference image, which is this Sondico fusion ball. As you can see, there are 3 main segments on the front panel here, and then there are 6 panels all over the sphere. But all the panels are made up of these 3 segments here. So we're going to model these 3 segments, and we're going to mirror it all over the ball. Now the hard part is all of these ridges and everything and all the smooth surfaces going on along these valleys. It's going to be difficult to add that much geometry to get all of this detail while still keeping a perfectly spherical shape and not having any edges or creases. But we're going to do it, and it's going to look great. So I'm going to press Shift and A and add a mesh plane. Go into edit mode. With all the vertices selected, press U and select Project from View. And let's scale these UVs up to surround the soccer ball here. Or football, whatever you want to call it. So now we have our blueprints here. And because we're going to be using a mirror modifier, we have to keep in mind that we need to have everything aligned perfectly along these axes and just centered properly and modeled straight. So let's see. So let's center our soccer ball here on all of our axes. Let's rotate it to the left a little bit to make this line straight here. Alright, so we have our x-axis running through the center of the ball. We have our z-axis also running through the center of the ball. So that looks good. And the top quadrant here is a little bit skewed because of the perspective, so I'm going to be working on the bottom right quadrant here. And we're going to be drawing that, and then we're going to mirror it all over the place. We're going to use a couple different cool modifiers. So let's start off by actually drawing this. So get out of edit mode. Let's go into side view, and I'm going to move that back 1 blender unit just so it's out of the way of anything we're going to be adding in front of it. Press Shift and A and add another mesh plane. Go into edit mode and scale that down. And I'm going to add a vertical loop cut by pressing Control and R. Then right clicking to keep that new edge in the center. And let's delete the left side vertices there. And let's do the same with a horizontal loop cut. So press Control and R, left click there, then right click to keep it in place. Select the 2 top vertices and delete those. Cool. Now let's see. Now we just start tracing. Select these 2 vertices, press E, and extrude them down on the Z-axis. Move that vertex over a little bit. Press E, extrude it down on the Z-axis to about right there. Add a loop cut there. Place it where the peak is, and add a loop cut here. And let's move these 2 vertices down. And move that vertex right into place over there. I'm going to move this collection of edges here down a little bit. So hold Alt and right click on that edge. It'll select all the ones connected to it. Press G and then Z, move that down a little. Alright, now this middle segment is pretty much the same height as the bottom segment here. So we have to reflect that in our model. So I'm going to move around some of these vertices. I'm going to move that down. That should be fine. It actually is, especially on the edge over here, a little bit shorter than the bottom segment. I'm just eyeing it up. This isn't a perfect process. Alright, we're good to go with that. Now I'm going to select our blueprints and move that to the last layer to hide it. I think we're done with that for now. Let's drag over our properties window over here. And let's go to our modifiers buttons. With our object here selected, go into the add modifier option and let's select mirror. So it mirrors it on the x-axis, and let's mirror it on the y-axis too. You might have to click on the z-axis instead of the y-axis Depends on what view you created your object from. Alright, so there we go. There's our one panel. Now we have to curve this around onto a sphere. There's a modifier for that called the cast modifier. So let's add a modifier and choose cast. And change the factor from 0.5 to 1. That means it's going to stretch our object here into a sphere at 100%. But right now, our object is directly on top of our origin point. Casting it into a sphere takes into account how far the vertices are from the origin point. So let's go into side view, select all the vertices, press G and then Y, and hold Control and move it to the left one full blender unit. Now let's get out of edit mode and see how that looks. There we go. Now it's starting to look better. Alright, now press Shift and D. Whoops, no. Delete that. Press Alt and D to make a linked duplicate, and then rotate it. Hold Control and rotate it 90 degrees. Then in top view, press R, hold Control, and rotate that another 90 degrees, since that's how these things are going to be aligned. Alright, and as you can see, there's a big gap between the top panel and the bottom panel. That can be fixed by simply going into edit mode and moving these on the y-axis maybe 0.2 blender units. Oh, you can see they're getting closer, but we need to move it a little bit more. Actually, let's enable, yeah, there we go. So this way we can see it in edit mode. I just clicked on this little icon here so that the modifier is visible while we're in edit mode. Now press G and then Y, move it closer, get out of edit mode, G and then Y, get out of edit mode. Just get it real close so that these are almost touching. G, then Y. There we go, just like that. Now because we made a link duplicate up here, any changes we made to this one is also made to this one up top. It's just that when you have modifiers on your objects, you won't be able to see these changes real time. So you'll have to get out of edit mode to see how things changed. Press Ctrl and Z and undo that. That was just to illustrate. Alright, so now what we're going to do is modify this shape so that all of these vertices meet and we create some perfectly interlocking pieces. So I'm going to delete this top panel there, and I really need to be able to see this update real time when I have linked duplicates. So we're going to have to use something else other than linked duplicates. There's another way to go about this to see the changes in real time, and that's to use the array modifier. So let's add a new modifier called array. You can see it makes a duplicate. And when we go into edit mode and we make modifications to one, it'll make modifications to the duplicate that was made from the array modifier, which is great. But we need to find a way to wrap this second panel here over onto the side of our ball. And we can do that using object offset, this field here. But first we need to create the object we're going to use for offsetting. And I want to create this directly in the center of our sphere, so I need to reset the cursor position. So press Shift and S and choose cursor to center. And that'll replace it back at the 0, 0, 0 origin of the entire Blender universe. And now we can press Shift and A and add an empty with plane axis. I mean, it doesn't matter which of these you choose, but I'm just going to choose plane axis. Now select our panels here and enable object offset and click on this field and select the empty object. You can see something weird happens. And let's change the offset from 1 to 0. We don't want it to move, we just want it to rotate around, which it did. Based on the empties configuration, or orientation I mean, it moves the second panel created from an array around. So if you rotate the axis, if you rotate the empty here, you can see that it's going to change the position and rotation of the second panel. So I'm going to simply rotate the empty 90 degrees clockwise in top view. So we have these two panels interlocking now. I just need a third one over here. So let's select our panels and change the array count from 2 to 3. Perfect. I didn't even have to make any changes. Now our goal is to fill in these gaps. We need to move these vertices so that they all meet perfectly. And we can do that by enabling this option right here. Let me go into edit mode. You can see when we go into edit mode, we have our original flat plane right here. But what happens when I click on this icon? Adjust edit cage to modifier result. It's going to show us what edit mode would look like if this modifier was actually applied. So we can select these vertices and move them around. Now I want to work with the top right section of the ball here, but selecting and moving this vertex is moving a little bit weird. And that's because this section of the ball is actually mirrored from the bottom. So we're actually selecting and moving the bottom vertex, which is why it appears to be moving counterintuitively. So let's see. I'm going to apply the mirror modifier. And let's see if that helped any. And I'm going to enable this cage option again. And there we go. Now I can move this up and the vertex actually moves up. Now let's make all these vertices align with each other. Now it doesn't matter where you move these vertices, we still have the cast modifier applied, so no matter how you move them, it's still going to be as if you're moving them on the surface of a sphere. Now you can see as I'm moving these around, trying to get all of them to meet. Our other panels are updating in real time as well. And everything is pretty easy right now. Alright, now let's trim some excess. I'm going to select the left side vertices here and delete those. And also delete the bottom ones. So we're left with 1/8 of a sphere. But still we're working with 1/4 of a panel because we have it mirrored in the other places using the array modifier. Not really mirrored, but you know what I mean. Alright, so now what we're going to have to do, we have to worry about creating the different segments here. So we're going to need to add some loop cuts so we can create the valleys. Let's see, how should we do that? Press Ctrl and R, and let's make, Ctrl and R to add a loop cut there, and then move it down to about here. Be careful when you're adding these loop cuts here, because this is going to determine how wide your valleys are. So mine don't look like they're going to be that wide. Let's make them a little bit, they look like they're going to be too wide. So I'm going to make them a little bit tighter by selecting those loops of edges there. I'm pressing G twice or edge slide to move it closer to the center here. Alright, cool. Now, where else? Well, we're going to have some valleys around the edges here, so we're going to need to add some loop cuts around the edges. So press Ctrl and R. Move that over. Alright, looks good. Add a loop cut at the top too. Now I'm going to have to hand select a couple of these and edge slide them up a little bit so that the height of this space is consistent throughout. You can see it's definitely off over here, so I'm going to select them and press G twice and just slide them up. There we go. Everything's looking jagged now, but we're going to add some geometry in a little bit, and the cast modifier is going to make sure everything stays perfectly spherical. Alright, so we have all of our edge loops in order. Now what we're going to do is select all of the vertices that we're going to be moving away from the soccer ball to create the valleys. So I'm going to go through and hand select all of these vertices here, making sure to leave out the edges in the middle and on the end. And let's go into the mesh buttons here, or object data buttons, whatever this is called. And under vertex groups, press the plus sign, double click on the name and rename it to peak. And click on assign with those vertices selected. So let's deselect everything. Let's see if that worked. Let's press the select button with peak selected. There we go. Alright, cool. So that's set. Let's go back to the modifiers buttons. And let's see, what do we do now? I'm going to add a new modifier for subdivision surface. View levels of 2. This is just for previewing. You can see as soon as I subsurfed it, all of our ridges here, the ridges that define the shape and style of this ball, are lost because subsurf smooths it out way too much. So we're going to need to add some extra loop cuts here. So press Ctrl and R, and let's add a loop cut there and slide it to about right there. So it maintains one of our edges here, or one of our corners. And let's do the same thing at the top here. Press Ctrl and R, add a loop cut, slide it close to that corner right there. Alright, that looks better. Is that all we have to do? Just those two? Nope, we need one on the right side here. So press Control and R here and slide that down to maintain our shape on the right side there. There we go. So that maintains the shape of our segment nicely, just with a couple extra edge loops. Alright, cool. Although everything looks segmented now, or faceted, whatever you want to call it, but we're going to fix that by adding some geometry pretty soon. So let me delete that subsurf modifier now, since we don't need it quite yet. Now I'm going to apply the array modifier, and I'm going to fix all these seams and make sure everything is merged together. So get out of edit mode and click on, let's see, I guess we have to apply the cast modifier first. So let's do that. Apply the cast modifier and then apply the array modifier. And now we need to go and fix all these seams by merging these vertices together. So I'm going to press Control and up there. Alright, so I'm going to select these two vertices there. Press W, select merge, and at center. And I'm just going to do that for the rest of these too. But as you can see, there's no partner vertex for this one to merge with. So I'm going to press Control and R, add a loop cut here, and slide it up. And then select those two vertices and merge them. Same thing there and there. And we're going to do the same thing all over the place. Add loop cuts where you need to, and merge everything together. Alright, great. Now before we add the cast modifier back in, we need to add a lot of extra geometry for the cast modifier to make this a perfectly smooth sphere. So press Control and R and mouse over this area here so you get this purple line, and then use your mouse wheel and scroll it up to add a bunch of extra loop cuts, just like that. And basically we're going to do the same thing all over the place. We're going to add loop cuts consistently throughout the soccer ball. And make sure the loop cuts you add, make sure you add enough of them that it's consistently detailed throughout the soccer ball, or as consistently as possible. There we go. So it should look something like that. There's a good amount of faces in every section. So let's add back in that cast modifier. Add a factor of 1. There we go. Perfectly smoothed out 1/8 of a sphere. So I pressed the T key for the left side toolbar here and clicked on smooth shading with that selected to smooth out all those faces and make sure that no ridges or creases are present. Alright, cool. Now what? Now what? Now we're going to mirror this. So add new mirror modifier. Mirror on the X, Y, and Z axis. Alright, now what's left? Now let's apply the cast modifier. Go into edit mode. Make sure nothing is selected and go into the object data buttons here. And with the peak vertex group selected, click on select. Now we want to scale this up, but we want to scale it up based on the center of the sphere, so where the origin point is. So let's get out of edit mode real quick. Press Shift and S and choose cursor to selected. Or you can also do cursor to center since our sphere is also centered in the world. And you can either press the period key to scale or to transform based on the 3D cursor, or you can go into our pivot point option or pivot point menu right here and choose 3D cursor. So all of our transformations are going to be based on the position of the 3D cursor now. So let's go into edit mode, and with all of our peak vertices selected, press the S key and scale it up. Let me zoom in a little bit. So S to scale it up, and it looks absolutely perfect. Some of the shading is kind of artifacty down here, so I'm going to go back into the modifiers buttons and simply add an additional subsurf modifier on level 1 beneath the mirror modifier. Now if you want to achieve the stitch effect that the ball has going on around all the different segments, we can achieve that pretty easily. I'm going to click on the eye icons on the modifiers to hide them and go back into edit mode, and with all the peak vertices still selected, press W and choose select inverse. Then press H to hide those vertices. Now I'm going to hold Alt and right click on the surrounding edges of each segment, but making sure not to select the edges on the outer rim. So I've got all these edges selected. Now I'm going to go into the select menu and I'm going to choose checker deselect. Then if you press the T key, you can change your selection by changing the nth selection here. So instead of every other vertex, it's every other vertex. And you even have an option here to skip some vertices. But I'm just going to leave it as every other vertex being selected. It's going to make the stitching look a little uniform, but I don't really care. So I've got those vertices selected. Now in the object data buttons, I'm going to add a brand new vertex group called stitches. And I'm going to press assign with those vertices selected. Now I'm going to do the same thing for each segment. And now when you're finished doing all that, deselect all the vertices, and with the stitches vertex group selected, click on the select button just to make sure that you haven't added any of the rim vertices to that group, and just to make sure you've selected vertices around all of the segments. Perfect. Now press Alt and H to unhide all the vertices. Deselect everything. And make sure the cursor is at the center of the world or the center of your sphere, whichever. And with the 3D cursor still as the pivot point or the pivot center, click on the select button to select all of our stitch vertices. And now let's zoom in real close to any section. Press the S key and scale that in just a little tiny bit. Now let's go into the modifiers buttons and let's click on our subsurf modifier, make that visible. You can see there's a hint, there's some ripples here and there from the stitching, but that just means I didn't scale it down enough. So scale it down a little bit more, and then there we go. The stitching becomes a little bit more visible, and now it looks like a softer material. Scale down a little bit more. There we go. That doesn't look too bad. Now enable the mirror modifier, make that visible again. Alright, now there's two things left that I want to do before calling this finished. First thing I want to do is fix the angles here. I made them a little bit too sharp by putting the loop cuts just a little bit too close together. So if you need to fix your model too, just follow along with what I do here. And this is going to be pretty simple. I'm just going to go in edit mode and select this vertex at the middle of that angle there, and angle the view so that this area is flat with the camera view. And then I'm going to press the O key for proportional vertex editing, and let's change the fall off type from smooth to sharp. And now press the G key to move it, and the influence circle is a little bit too big, so I'm going to scroll up with the mouse wheel to scale down the influence. Okay, that looks good, but I'm going to select all three of these vertices here. There we go, that's better. Alright, so I smoothed that angle out a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing with this corner here. Alright, cool, that's fixed. Now the last thing I want to do is, I didn't actually make these separate segments. As you can see, there's no physical separation. So that's what we're going to do now. So let's go in edit mode, and now we're going to select all the edges inside the valleys. So zoom into a valley, hold Alt and right click on one of the edges, and select all the ones connected to it, and just keep doing that for each of the valleys we have. And sometimes the selection extends past the valley, so just press the C key and middle click and deselect the ones that are outside the valley. Once you have all your edges selected, what we need to do now is separate these edges from themselves so that we can extrude it inward. If we tried extruding it in as is, it's just going to give us a weird result since everything's connected to each other. So we need to rip these apart, and we're going to do that using a tool called Rip. And the hotkey for that is the V key. So press V, and you can see it just ripped it apart from the other edges. Now we need to select both sets of the edges we have in the valleys now. And since after we use the Rip tool, we only have one set of edges selected. I'm going to deselect everything, and we're going to go into the select menu and choose non-manifold. And it's going to select all the edges that aren't connected to anything. But it selected the edges around the rim as well, so we're going to need to deselect them. Only leave selected all of the edges in the valleys, just like we had selected before. So press the C key and middle mouse click to deselect all the vertices we don't want selected. There we go. Once we have that selection back, which is now two sets of edges, we can proceed with extruding this inward. So make sure the cursor is at the center of the ball. Zoom into a good spot. Press E and then S and scale that in just a little bit. Alright, cool. Now the only thing left to do is these gaps right here can be fixed by pressing the W key and selecting Remove Doubles. Here we go. That looks much better. So that's pretty much it. So here's my finished product after adding some textures in a grassy field. You can download the finished blend file below. And if you know of any better techniques to achieve a model like this, then please leave it in the comments below.